Dr. Christian, could you explain for the audience what informed consent means in the medical community and what the principle is about do no harm first and how those principles play in this context?
Right. So thank you for asking that question, Robert, because we now have what I would call a medical emergency in our kids, and that is protecting them from an injection they don't need and which can be quite dangerous to them. So that thank you for that question, because informed consent is so basic to our discussion. What is informed consent? It's a time-honored principle. It's not something we invented, after I started training to be a surgeon. It's something that's been there for, several generations. The philosopher, medical people have spoken about it. It's been embedded into the history of medicine. So informed consent is essentially where before you administer any injection, treatment, anything, the patient has to give consent based on an understanding. Now, it's not enough, mind you, it's not enough for them to be given a piece of paper. I'm familiar with what is called the Montgomery decision in England, where the judge said it's not enough just to give them a piece of paper. They actually have to understand what's written in it, and you have to make sure that they understand. So you have to the patient or the person receiving the injection must know the risk or the risks of the injection, the benefits or lack thereof, and whether there are any alternatives. Okay. So in this case with COVID, for the children, my press conference, and in the press conference, I made very clear that I wasn't speaking on behalf of the college or public health or the Saskatchewan Health Authority. I was speaking as a physician and a father to parents and the children. So let's talk about, if you want me to, I can go through each of that: risk, benefit, alternatives. Now, if you talk about the risk, I have to say, it's been appalling. The risks have not been explained to virtually anybody. Also, what about those who are already immune? Now, in various countries, it's been shown that children between 50 and 80 or 90% of kids have already had COVID. Okay? So these kids, if they get a vaccine, what is that additional risk? So that's part of the risk too. So and now with the Omicron strain, part of the risk discussion is that, hey, this vaccine is for the Wuhan strain of the original vaccine of 2020. It does not prevent transmission. It does not prevent infection. It may make you sick and may kill you. And that, I mean, I'm speaking in lay language, but this is the truth. Some people have died after getting the vaccine. In children, there is this thing called myocarditis. But remember, myocarditis is only one of several. There is a slew of side effects from this vaccine. Just look up any database. Look up the WHO database.
Well, you know what? And Dr. Francis, not to interrupt you, I want to just bring one thing up so that anybody who dares say that you now are spreading disinformation or medical misinformation, I'll just pull up Dr. Kieran Moore and we'll just listen to him for 30 seconds. Listen to Dr. Kieran Moore.
Instead of saying it's a personal decision.
So that nobody can accuse you of anything.
Approach.
What's the risk?
The risk, there's always a risk to having any therapeutic versus a benefit. You want to make sure there's a very strong benefit versus the risk. If we're an 18-year-old healthy individual, the risk to getting hospitalized if we have no medical illness is very, very low. We know there is a risk, a very small risk, 1 in 5,000 that may get myocarditis, for example.
We can end it there. I just so that no one dares say, Dr. Francis Christian, you're an extremist spreading misinformation. That's Ontario's chief medical officer. I just Googled it a few seconds ago. I see the news now is trying to cover up for him and say, oh, he was overstating it. So now getting back, Dr. Christian, to the small risk of myocarditis, pericarditis, and other issues.
I'm glad you brought that up because he says 1 in 5,000. Some other studies say 1 in 2,500, 1 in 2,000. I got to tell you, this is only cases that are detected. Now, I know people who, young people, I'll give you an example. I know an engineer who is in his 20s. He said after his second dose, he had chest pain for about 4 weeks. He was a marathon runner. He could run only about 100 meters, and then he could only walk. He didn't go to the hospital. So that's a myocarditis case, but that wasn't detected. Silent myocarditis. So just the detected myocarditis, 1 in 5,000. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot, but if you're vaccinating millions of kids, that means thousands of cases of myocarditis. And then we were told that, hey, COVID itself can give you myocarditis. The infection can give you myocarditis. Now, what does the data tell us? So there is a very large Israeli study, okay, hundreds of thousands of cases from Israel. And this is a very good study because it showed that the risk of myocarditis from a natural COVID infection is not higher than normal. In other words, COVID infection does not pose a myocarditis risk for individuals. And this is across all age groups. Hundreds of thousands of patients. So the COVID infection does not increase myocarditis risk, whereas the vaccine does. And then when you talk of risks, you have to talk of short-term risks, including myocarditis, medium-term risks, various autoimmune problems and so on, and then long-term. Now, for an 80-year-old person who gets the vaccine, who doesn't have many years ahead of him or her, long-term risk doesn't seem like a big thing. But for a 10-year-old kid, if our kids are getting this at 4 years and 6 months, my word, this is becoming an emergency of massive proportions to protect our kids from this unnecessary vaccine. So the risk also has to take into account the fact that for kids, COVID is a very mild disease. The risk of dying of COVID is less than that in a bad flu year. So the annual flu can kill more people than COVID. And then you have to look at the statistics themselves. How many kids actually died of COVID with the diagnosis only being COVID versus kids who died based on, the fact that they were admitted to hospital with a whole lot of other things, and they also tested positive for COVID. In fact, there was a scandal in Alberta where one of our public health officers said some kid had died of COVID, and then it turned out he actually had stage 4 brain cancer.
And was in a coma, Dr. Christian. I went over this thoroughly. Dina Hinshaw initially claimed he was the youngest teen in Alberta to die of COVID. Yeah. The sister came out and said he was in stage 4 brain cancer coma, and then she retracted it. But I think all in all, in Canada, 19 kids under 19, and I think it's probably even less if we exclude died with versus died of. But
correct. So that's all part of the discussion. We have to have a discussion of benefit. What is the benefit? The benefit is first of all, it does not prevent or it does not avoid the kid from transmitting it. So even if you say that it sort of gives herd immunity and prevents kids from giving it to, say, their grandparents, which is another scandal, by the way, where in history of medicine have we used children as human shields against the adults? It's the other way around, isn't it? Adults protect children. Children are not asked to protect adults. Even if that were true, shouldn't the choice be the child's? But it's not true. It's not true. It doesn't prevent transmission. It doesn't prevent infection. In fact, if you look at the Ontario data, which they stopped doing, by the way, anytime the data becomes inconvenient, they stop giving it to us. But if you look at the Ontario data, up until the recent data, if you had a booster shot, you were 3 times more likely to get COVID than if you were unvaccinated. So all this, has to be explained. The fact that myocarditis is one of the problems, but there are other problems too. There's the other ethical issue of inducing fear in children. Now, I know some grandparents who have said that, my kid is avoiding me because he's been told by his teachers and by some adults that, hey, you can kill your grandma. So my kid comes to see me and then runs away. I mean, this is completely ridiculous. It doesn't have any basis in science or ethics. And so children don't have a voice, and we must be their voice. And that was the basis of my press statement on informed consent. Then what are the alternatives? The alternative is not to be vaccinated at all, because for kids, it's not a problem. COVID is not a problem. The other alternatives is if you do get COVID, there is a slew of treatments available. Now, if parents want to know what are the treatments available for COVID, what I would advise them to do is don't go to Google, because Google is the algorithms are skewed to take you away from alternative opinions. So, and I don't want to go into why that is, but don't go to Google, don't go into Bing and things like that. If you go into Google, just go on the second page or the third page. Use a European search engine like Metager, which sort of metagr.org, which is much more fair. And also go to credible websites like the FLCC. So the Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance has a website with lots of data on what works. And ivermectin is just one of several things that work in early COVID.